All right, we're back. It's COMP228, and it's week 6, lesson 6, part 3 in our broadcast for Java programming here at Centennial. And where we last left off, we were kind of exploring different the IDE, the Eclipse IDE, and how to add in some additional functionality with the IDE. I got most of you to install Window Builder, right, which is the tool we can use to explore some different options. What I'd like to do now is go through the PowerPoint presentation to make sure that we've kind of hit all of our high points. And I've uploaded the PowerPoint presentation up online. It is pretty big still. If I on eCentennial, right, under week 6, the PowerPoint itself is 19 megs. The PDF in PDF form is 17.9 megs, so it's quite big. I told you it's like 180, or it was something like 180 slides, right? Now some of the slides we've covered, so we don't have to go through that. And that's what I do when I do my demos, right? We cover some of the slides. We just don't go through the PowerPoints when you do that. But here I want to make sure that I cover some key points because the stuff I'm going to cover today, I'm going to test you on next week, right? Remember, next week we have an exam. I'm going to let you guys know probably which day it's going to be, or which time of the day, and if I'm going to do both things, I'm going to send out a notification. For now, I want you to assume that your exam is going to be in the first part. So that means like in the morning at 10:30, from 10:30 to 12:30, that's going to be your exam. It might be a two-parter. So like I said, there might be another exam piece that we're going to do in the afternoon, like now, between 6:30 and 8:30. What I'm going to try to do, as I've seen different things, I might break it off into a very simple practical piece where I get you to connect your program, your driver, create a driver, and use classes, inheritance, that kind of thing, and polymorphism. Those things will be on the exam for sure, right? And to use pieces in the exam so that way, you're going to create something. But I'm going to give you a lot of the code, and all you need to do is kind of connect it to make it work. Now, that might sound like it's easy, but actually getting somebody else's code and understanding what the hell it does is a lot harder than making your own code, right? So, it's going to be very short. There can't be a lot of requirements in the exam right now. So what I'm going to do is, of course, I'm going to make it so that it's fairly straightforward for you guys to get. Okay, so let's assume that next week at the first period of the first part of our session together on the Tuesday at 10:30 is when our exam is going to happen. Okay, let's take a look at this PowerPoint. So again, I'm looking at the PowerPoint. Yours is in PDF version, and what we're talking about again is GUI. This is GUI components part 1. GUI components part 2 in the book is like chapter 20 something, right? It's way up there. I'm not sure if we're going to get to it in this course. So again, we talked about what a GUI is, which is like this user interface. This is very basic stuff that you know about. One part that it's covered in the book that I'm not going to cover here, and I'm not going to ask you about. For example, let's talk about some stuff that's general for all GUIs, right? Or user interfaces. I like to call them a UI as opposed to GUI, right? Nowadays, it's UI and UX, right? User experience and user interface, right? So from a UI perspective, one thing that we can tell is that there's different parts of a UI. One of them is the title bar, right? And even if we run the current application the way we have it, so if I go into my files and I go into my program.java, and again, if you guys if you want to follow along, right? Then you can go up on GitHub. I have my in COMP228 lesson 6. There is all the files you need to kind of catch up with me. Right, so if I press play here, if you notice I have this this swing application that comes up, and I have the title bar, which is empty right now, and I've got the actual frame itself. This is the actual frame, and let's go back to the PowerPoint. The menu bar, which I don't have. There's no menu bar in this one. And in the top right region for Windows, you've got the set of buttons, and on the Mac, it's on the left. There she is. And inside the GUI components area, which is in here, is where we have all of our components, right? So that's really it in a nutshell from a naming convention perspective. It's very simple. You've seen it before. So if I look at the actual UI that we created, we have a GUI component. This is just a label. We have our title bar that's empty right now with a control set of buttons here on the left for Mac, on the right for Windows, right? And this is our frame. Remember, we're working with the J-frame right now, okay? Inside the J-frame, as a default, we have a J-panel, like we saw last time, right? Again, we don't have to have all those things, and we can program them. We can use it. We can do it programmatically or through the UI of the IDE drag and drop controls that we did earlier. Let me just close this off. Now, in the book, it talks about this idea of a Nimbus look and feel. I'm not going to talk to it too much. All it does is there's a setup that you can perform to kind of change the look and feel of your windows. So there's to Nimbus. That's all it is, right? And there's a bit of code you have to put into your IDE for it to go. So I'm not going to test you on it. I'm not going to ask you questions about the Nimbus look and feel. Right, but really what it does is it changes the way you do it. There's a couple of operating system changes, or even some changes to your application, and then once you make those changes, you have a different look and feel. It's almost like a steel look and feel to the UI. Really not necessary. You can change it later on. So what we use here, and if you look at the example, I'm just going to make this a little larger so you can see the code example that we've got here. It says most applications use windows or dialog boxes, or they also call them dialogs. And then the J option pane, package java.swing, provides pre-built dialog boxes for input and output. Now, sometimes we need these. They're like message boxes. Think of it that way. So remember how we have an alert box in JavaScript or some kind of message window? That's what the J option pane does, right? So the J option pane is just a way of alerting or creating an alert box that's pre-built for us. Instead of creating our window the way we have it right now, so when I come here and I click the kind of debugging, it brings up our predefined window. The J option pane actually creates a predefined window that's built into Java and the Swing library. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to import this J option pane into the Java, from the Java Swing package. We have to import this library here, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to define a couple things. We're going to say that we're going to show input dialog. Here's enter the first integer, and J option pane, which if you notice we're defining, show input dialog, enter the second integer, right? So we're going to do these two things in this J option pane, and we're going to assign them to first number and second number as so there's two boxes that are going to pop up here, right, to show this. Then we're going to do some multiplication or addition here, and then we're going to show another message that shows the answer. Hey, guys, this is really rudimentary, and this is kind of ugly. But let's see what it does. So I'm going to kind of instantiate almost like a static object with the J option pane a class. You can grab those people and let them in. So let's do that. So instead of doing this, we're just going to comment this piece out, just like we've never done it before, right? And let's use this J option pane stuff. So we're going to define a couple of string variables, right? So same thing. We're going to say capital S string, and the first string variable that we're going to define is first name, right? And we're also going to define a string that's last name. So first name, last name. And what I want to do is I want to use first name equals to, and here's J option pane, right? Take a look at the PowerPoint, where it says J option pane dot show input dialog, right? And then some kind of input from my first name, last name. Let's try this out. So and this is kind of the poor way to do it. So again, if you notice, if I go show input dialog, it actually does that for me, right? Show input dialog. And what I want to do is it's asking me for a message that I'm going to add in, like please, or enter your first name. Enter your first name. Cool. So that's going to get a string, enter your first name. And if you notice, I didn't really have to do anything there. J option pane, show input dialog. I kind of pulled that up. And what it did was, if you notice, as soon as I started typing J option pane, it added this Java swing component, right, for J option pane in there, so it allows me to do it. If it didn't, you can always go into a quick fix and add that J option pane in there manually. So let's see if we just did this one first name, what it does. If I just fire this up, right, and if I check the program out, then bam, I got this little input box with, enter your first name. And if I enter it, like whatever I want, all of a sudden I've got an input and my program is still running. Take a look. Down here, my program is still going, right? So I haven't told it what to do. Now it's finally killed. But for a second there, it lasted, right? Because all I've done with my J option pane is to pull in some data. That's all I'm doing with it. Think about it as a dialog box or some kind of input box that kind of flashes up that allows me to put in some input. Let's do the same thing. We're going to add in another J option pane. Instead of first name, we're going to kind of use last name for that. So here's my first name, last name. And this is two different dialog boxes, right, that are going to come up. Let's try this out now. So we got first name and last name. And then just to make sure that it's running, I'm going to do a system.out.println, right? And I'm going to use, kind of first name, and we're going to say, we'll kind of concatenate everything, which is plus first name plus last name, and then plus last name. So that's where it's going to print out everything, right? And by the way, if I've typed it wrong, it says, give me an error, right? What's the error? It says first name cannot be resolved to a variable. Oh, did I do something wrong? Oh yeah, at the end. That'll be okay. So that's first name and last name, and let's see what it does now. So I'm expecting some kind of output later on when I run this thing to show you what it does. It's just a way of getting inputs. Well, there's one dialog box. So here's my first name. I press OK, and there's my last name. And then I get my last name, my last name's the output. So I actually get some input from my first name, last name. That's what it does. My application's still running. It's not good, right? Because it took a while for it to die. So that's what it does. The basics. And if you notice, that's the option that's in the book. Now you can also take a look at this other thing. It says joption.showMessage, show message dialog, which is different than show input dialog. So there's input dialog and message dialog. Now, let me tell you this. Show message dialog is like, kind of a message window or whatever. It's actually quite interesting for us to pull up almost like an alert box of what this does. Now take a look at what it has. It has a couple of options. First option is null. Then the sum is plus the sum. That's what they're printing in this particular example. We're not going to print the sum. We're actually going to output it this way. And the sum of the two integers, and then some J option pane plain message is the last option. All right, so J option pane.show message dialog is what we want to use next. Let's do that. I mean, these are very basic functions. So instead of system.out.println, let's keep this format for a second. I'm going to use some of that stuff. I'm going to shrink this window a little bit so you can see more of this. So let's do that. So we'll say J option pane, and if I press Control space, it's going to give me an example of what to use. J option pane dot show, and if you notice, there's a bunch of different shows. They show confirm dialog, they show input dialog, they show internal confirm dialog, right? They show message dialog. Okay, I want to use that one. So show message dialog, and there's a bunch of constructors, right? There's and again, I'm showing you. There's one that's showing the parent component, and there is no parent component. That's why it's null. And they're showing you different constructors here. So constructor signatures, right? So let's see if I can do this. Move this aside to show you the constructor signatures that we can have on. So let's take a look. There's this one that has parent component and an object message. That's one signature. There's a parent component, which is null, and an object message, and a string title, and a message type. There's a component, the parent component, object message, string title, message type, and an icon, right? That's pretty good. Like, there's quite a bit of flexibility here. right? So that's what I want to probably use. I want to use this one. So I'm going to kind of click this one. And it gives me the stuff that it's asking for. When I've clicked one on, right, it's listening for all these different components. So parent component, obviously there's none. So we're going to leave that as null. My message is going to be this, right? This whole line here. That's my message. Let's see what it does with it. So I'm going to kind of copy this one and put it here, right? And then my title is just a title as a string. So I'm going to say, we're going to call this, you know, maybe profile info, right? That's my title. And my message type, and again, is there's different kinds of message types. And how do I know what they are? Well, let's start off with stuff that's in our PowerPoint to figure it out, right? If we didn't know, it would be JOptionPane dot and then some kind of enum, right? So let's do that. So we'll start typing JOptionPane, and probably in all in caps, OptionPane dot. And if you notice, there's a bunch of enums that come up when I start typing. Like plain message is the one we want to use. So I'll just double click on that. That's an enumeration, right? So that has a certain value. And then the icon, if I look at the icon, the last one is an icon that I can use. And I'm probably going to say there's probably going to be another JOptionPane icon. Let's check that out. So I'll say JOptionPane. I'm just guessing. And then if I try and pull that up, I want to try and use some kind of icon, or maybe it's some kind of icon enumeration that I got to pull up, right? If I can't find it here, it's okay, because remember the signature allows me to take it back. So an example of this would be, if I can't remember what the icon is, if I start typing icon and I press Control Space, because I can't remember what it is, right? You know, maybe it'll bring it up here as one of my things. Here's icon for my Java swing. I don't know what it is though, icon. So it might be icon dot something. Let's try this out, icon dot, and no. It's something like that though, some kind of fixed icon. So let's just erase that and use the original signature without the icon. All right, let's check this out and see what happens. So it's going to ask me two questions. My first name, which is kind of poor, and my last name. And now I have my first name, last name. My profile info is my text, is my title, and my first name is Tom, and my last name is Testicular, and I have an OK button. When I press this, I also get my first name, last name in the console. So pretty straightforward stuff. Any questions around JOptionPane? And JOptionPane, two options we've looked at: show input dialog, show message dialog. Very simple way of communicating in and out. Show message dialog, think about it this way. You're building an application and you don't want to just give output to the console. You want to get some pop-up for whatever. It's another place you can use some debugging, right? Typically we don't want to show a message dialog unless there's some kind of message where we stop the user and saying, meh, there's an error. That's typically one. Or do you want to continue, or confirm, yes or no? Right? We want to use those kind of message dialogs. And it kind of interrupts the flow. It's a modal window, which kind of interrupts the flow of our application. So when we put up a dialog box, like an alert box in JavaScript, right? It stops application flow. It's called modal, or mode. It's a moded type window. There's also modeless, right? Which means you can have another screen that pops up, but it doesn't stop you from moving around and clicking other places, right? This JOptionPane, let me show you what it does. If I do it again, and if I try clicking somewhere else, it'll do that, but my application is stopped until I do this. If I press cancel and cancel, I'm going to get null, null, right? I won't be able to get to the last one until I do the first two. Okay. And again, if I had an origin, then this null wouldn't be null anymore. It would point back to a certain window. I can launch it from a window. It can be tied into a particular application. Right now, it's not tied to anything, right? So again, a good way of using input dialogues and message dialogues. Here are some examples of that from the book, right? And we're waiting for the enter. If you notice, if the user clicks cancel, everything returns null, like we said before, right? From a message dialog perspective, okay? Also, depending on what we enter, remember there's no control over the user's input, right? So the user can input. If I ask for a string, I'm good, right? Because it'll include everything. But if I ask for an integer or a float, I have to follow the same rules that we did before when we get input from the console, because there's no control over what the user is going to input, right? So I have to make sure that I do my exception handling, right? Or else I may get an exception error, right? Which is not what I want. Here's some defaults for the message dialog options that we looked at before. So there's an error message, an information message, a warning message, which is kind of cool. So an error message would be error, please enter the correct information, you know. And what we did is we said plain message, right? Now it comes with these different icons built in, but I can also assign an icon as an example instead. If I want to know what those are, like, you know, as an example, I can always look at the API documentation for Java Swing. So if I want to say JOption pane, I go back to Google it. So I say JOption pane, right? And if I press enter, and I want to look at, fine, I'll look at Java 7, SC7, it's the same as 8. I can see what I have an option to. So there's my object, my component, my icon, and it says the icon is wrapped in a JLabel and displayed in the dialog. Here's my message type, error message, question, plain message, my option type, default option, yes or no option, yes, no, cancel option. So I can actually put in an option type in there. And then there's a J button is created when I do an icon with this as the label, right? Icon is a decoration icon, right? To be placed in the dialog box, and a default value for this is determined by the message type parameters. So if I say my message type is an error type, then I'm going to get a different icon than I would, but I can always specify something else. And they give some really good examples here up online on the Oracle site to show you what a dialog for a JOption pane does, right? With some options. Here's the direct use. And if you go further down, it gives you more information about each of the fields and what they're expecting you to put in, like the OK option or the OK cancel option or whatever. I can ask for those two things. But how do I listen for different options? That's the question. And it's the same thing that we did when we used things on C#. You have to respond. You have to listen for the different options that you're getting back, right? Because remember, the JOption pane is returning something. So let me give you an example of that. If I go back to Java, when I do this message dialog piece, which is the piece I want to show you, right? Right now, it's going to return nothing, right? Because I'm not catching what it's returning anywhere. But if you take a look, right? If I just go into the documentation here, right? And if I look through just by hovering over, right? It gives me all the documentation I just saw online. Okay? With all the stuff that I was looking for, instead of searching online, I just have to hover over it in Eclipse. I don't know if you saw that. So here, I'm just hovering over this thing. So can I make it assign, just like I assigned my JOption pane here, and I assigned the output of whatever I asked for, the input dialog, I assigned it to a variable, first name. Can I assign this to something else so I can see what the output is? Let's check it out. So I want to see what my message return is. So I'm going to make a new string, and I'm going to call this message return, right? And my message return is going to be equal to, let's see if this works, message return is equal to this, right? If there's an error, it's going to come up, right? And if you notice, there's a quick fix that comes up. There's an error that comes up that says, whoa, type mismatch, cannot convert void to string. So you notice that right now this show message dialog returns nothing as is. Let's do one more time. One more thing that I want to show you here. So we've got this. I'll try and maximize the screen here for a second. Let's do another one of these, right? But make it a little bit more simpler. So let's get rid of this and go to JOption pane .show message dialog, and let's look at another constructor, another option here. So I've got, again, my option, my object message, right? My title, my message type. I'm not going to choose icon. And the other one is here's the other one, the internal message dialog. So those are the three, right? And here's my message type. My message type. So one thing I've changed is my message type. But what if I went to, instead of show message dialog, I want to do the confirm message. So I want to say confirm. Here's my show confirm dialog. That's a different thing, right? The confirm dialog actually gives me an option type, right? An option type. And then a message type. And an icon if I want it. Let's do this one. Okay, so my parent component is null for my confirm dialog, right? And my message is going to be, kind of an error, right? Let's make it an error. So error, incorrect input, something like that. And then the title will be error. Make an error box, right? And now here's the option type. I've got another thing here that shows option type and message type. My JOption pane message type, I know it's the same one, right? So at JOption pane dot, and then if you notice my my type is I want to make an error. If I type error message, there it is. There's error message. So that's one thing that'll work. But I can also use the type, which is here, and I do JOption pane, right? Dot, and I can do different options. I might do a cancel option, closed option, a default option if I want to, no option, or an OK option, OK cancel option, right? So let's choose, an OK cancel option and see what happens, because that means that I would get two buttons, OK and cancel. Before I just got OK. Now this is kind of weird because I'm saying this could be more like, do you want to continue, yes or no? Right? I need a semicolon. All right, so now that I've got that, let's see what it does on the second run. So I'm going to I don't need to see this part, so we're not going to ask first name and last name. I'll keep them there just so we can see the difference. And I'm just going to run this JOption pane show confirm dialog, which is different than the other ones. And this is something we use a lot too. OK error, it says, right? Incorrect input, OK cancel. So I click OK, and then I'm done, and it'll close it off in a second, right? Well, what does it return? Let's go use my message return type again now. Does it return anything? And if I hover over it for JOption pane show confirm dialog, this piece, it says that it returns an integer, right? That's what it returns. That's the return type. Integer indicating the option selected by the user, right? So let's think about this now. If I've got two options, cancel or OK, right? What is the integer that I'm printing out? And can I use it as can I assign it to a string? Can I do that? Like this. So message return is equal to JOption pane, blah, blah, blah. And of course it can't, because message return, if I hover over this thing, it says I can change this to an int. Let's do that. Let's do the quick fix. So I'll change this to an int now. And now we'll have an integer. Let's print out, let's send that into the console. So system.out.println, and we'll send message return to the console and see what kind of message we get when we press cancel or OK. Okay, let's press go ahead. So I run it. I press cancel and I get a 2. Now, you'd be forgiven to think that it'd be like a -1 or something like that, which makes more sense, right? Let's try that again. So run it again, press OK, I get a 0. How come it's a 2? I mean, I'm only seeing a 0 or a 2. Why not a 1, right? Let's change the OK cancel option, right? Something else. And let's see if there's other options we can get here. This is really valuable because if you want to create some kind of input, let's choose the default option. So there's a default option in there as well. What does that give us? So I'm going to kind of press play, default option, and it says OK, right? It was OK, I get a 0. So that's the default option. It's just an OK button, right? So if I just want the default option, just OK, thank you very much, let's continue. I'm going to get a 0 back, right, every time. Okay, let's do the other one. So how about the cancel option? So I did OK cancel, let's just do cancel. Let's see what I get back now. So OK, cancel, and press OK. I press, oh, I get OK, cancel again, right? So I press cancel, I get a 2. And when I press OK, I get a 0, right? So cancel option and OK cancel are the same, right? Let's explore one more time. Again, you'll be tested on this one. I'm going through in detail for you. So how about this yes, no, cancel option? There's one. Yes, no, cancel option, right? And again, I'm choosing this from the enumeration that's built into JOptionPane, right? I'm not making this up. It's just part of the API. So I'm going to run this now and see what I get. Yes, no, cancel, right? So I'm going to press yes, it's a 0. I press no, it's a 1. That's interesting. And when I go cancel, it's a 2. So it goes from the right to the left, and yet when we only had 2, it was a 0 or a 2. And if we had 3, it's a 0, 1, or 2, right? So you need to know what you're listening for. So if I was to say, well, if the user enters cancel, right? What am I really asking for? Cancel then, because it's yes, no, cancel. Cancel would be a 2, right? So if I get a 2, and if I do a switch statement, and if I switch a 2, then he's canceling, and I want to shut down my program, right? If he wants to continue, he presses a yes. That's going to be a 0, right? So 0 means I want to continue, so I can shut this option pane down and move on, right? If I get a 1, right? No, I want to get a no, so I don't want to continue, right? But I don't want to cancel out either. So maybe I want to go back and ask the same questions again, right?
So it just hides the other buttons.
Yeah, that's all it does, right? So I mean, it's there. So those are the options for my JOptionPane. Again, so we've looked at 3 different ways: a show input dialog, show message dialog, and a show confirm dialog. What if I want to build my own, right? Can I build my own show option pane, right? My own option pane, my own. I mean, I kind of did it earlier, right? But maybe I could build my own too, without knowing anything, if it's even possible, right? How would you go about building your own JOptionPane, object? Any ideas? New class. Let's try this out. So if we can do it. So I'm going to go right click on my default package. I'm going to go new class. And in this particular case, let's do one more thing. I'm going to cancel out of this for a second. How about over here? I got my swing, right? And I see there's a bunch of different options there. I've got a JFrame, a JPanel, a JDialog. JDialog. Maybe that's what I want to make, right? Instead of a JOptionPane and then make it a class. What happens when I make a JDialog? That might be the thing to do. So that's kind of like, looks like it's not a panel and it's not a frame. So most likely this one might be the best way to do it, right? Instead of wasting time. So let's try this one. So JDialog. All right, so we're going to call this, it's going to be part of the JDialog class. We're going to make this without knowing anything. We're just going to make a new thing called MyDialog. That's what my class is going to be called. Or we're going to make it, sorry, capital M, MyDialog. Remember, because it's a class. And our best practice tells us we need to make capitals for a class, right? And then we're going to use finish. All right, so now we get a stub of a class with a static method, right, like we did before. That's what this thing does. And I can also design it. So if I go back to my designer, right, it parses it, and I have a drag and drop form with an OK cancel button. Take a look, right? Where I can add in whatever I want in here. Okay, this is good. Let's go back to source for a second, right? Here's something, JDialog dispose on close. That's what it does for my close operation, right? And my set visible to true. But I have this as part of my static object that I want to kind of remove this piece. Remember I did this last time. And I want to put this stuff when I declare a my dialog as an extension of JDialog, which is the JDialog class, right? I also have something else. I've created a JPanel that we're calling content panel, which is a private final object. Remember, final, it means what? Static, or sorry, a constant, right? So let's go back to when we do content panel. Instead of that, just to go with our convention, I'm going to refactor rename this one, just if we're going to keep this thing. Refactor rename, and we're going to call this content panel underscore content panel. There we go. And if you notice, there's quite a bit of other options here that we're going to get into without knowing what any of this stuff does, right? Again, we're just kind of playing around. One thing I do want to do is I want to make it so that we use the this keyword. If I was going to refactor my stuff, I would definitely use the this keyword to go in here. And notice that this right here, my dialog, is the constructor for the dialog, my dialog class, right? So let's change this piece to show constructor again. Constructor. Right? It's just and now we're setting up all this stuff, which I probably want to do in my initialize function just like I did before. So I'm going to kind of highlight everything. And if you notice, if you want to see where this is all at, this is that. And I think this might be it. Let me see. Yep. So anything that's in here, I want to highlight all this stuff, not including the last two curly braces, right? And I want to go refactor. So we did last time. This is just kind of a review. Refactor rename or extract method, which we're going to call, it's going to be a private method, but we're going to call underscore initialize. Right, here's my initialize method, and press OK. There it is. So this is my initialize method now that this is being called. It's a private method, right? And we're calling it inside of our constructor. So when we call our constructor, we initialize the dialog. Make sense? Here's our cancel button, and we have a set action command, cancel. And we have the OK button, which we're actually setting up the OK button is a type of J button we're going to get into later on. It's a J button object, right? Which we're instantiating a new J button object that's local to this one, right? Where we're setting up a set action command of OK. And this set action command is basically saying that treat this button as an OK button. So when you press this, it's going to give you a 1 or a 0, same as we got before, right? And our button pane, we're going to add an OK button, the OK button to our button pane, because each object is going to be inside of a container. And what we're going to say is we're going to get the root pane and set the default button as the OK button. So this button, the OK button that we're creating here, is going to be the default button. We're also going to use a border layout, and it's going to be south, which is going to be the bottom of our border, right? And we're also got an embedded flow layout where we're going to put it to the right, the whole JPanel. So some stuff we haven't seen before, but more or less if you actually were to try and read this thing, and again, I kind of separated these ones out, but I'm going to leave these anonymous objects here instead of making them themselves, just from a time perspective. We don't have time, but you could always split these up and make them separate. All right, this is where we have to get rid of this. We do see this dialog set visibility to true. We still see this as a requirement of our dialog. So we want to show our dialog, then we got to set our visibility to true, right? And we also have to set the default close operation to dispose on close. So when we open it up and we click OK, it's going to or cancel, it's going to close down. So we need to take this and remove it from here. So let's do that. So let's go back to my program, and we'll just kind of hide this stuff, and we'll hide this stuff for now. Leave it in there. We'll leave some of these variables in there. We may need to use them later on. And just scroll down here, and we're going to do this new my dialog. I'm going to kind of save this thing here. And we're going to say, well, you know, it's going to be my dialog is equal to a new my dialog. All right, that's kind of simple, right, to do that. So we have to instantiate the object first. The second thing we have to do is my dialog dot, and then if you notice, there's a bunch of different options. It knows what to do. I can add something to the dialog, to the box or whatever. But what I need to do is this option right here, which is set default close operation. Dialog, which is my dialog, dot set default close operation. I need to do this. So I'm going to take this piece, go back over here, and paste. And the other one I need to do is my set visible is true. Gotta put that into this as well. So I'm going to say my dialog dot, and let's just type it in, set visible to true. So we're going to launch this dialog box, from my driver class, the program file. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's take out that static class because we don't need it anymore. The static main method, we don't need this anymore, so we're going to remove it, right? Because that makes no sense for us to have this whole piece in. We're not using the try catch block, which might get us into trouble, but it's okay. We'll get rid of all this. All right, so now all we have is kind of a regular looking class, right? We have our JDialog, our my dialog class. And we also have our constructor. We've kind of created this constructor out here, where we have inside of our dialog, if I was to run this thing, going back to the program file and run it, it will launch our custom dialog. There it is. So that's our custom dialog box that we can create. And if you notice, right now, the options allow us for me to resize the box and so on. I can stop that from happening. I don't want to resize this option up and down. I can stop the resize. And if I click OK, right now it doesn't do anything when I click OK or cancel because I haven't programmed those buttons in. But if I click the little X on the top, it'll shut down my program. Dispose on close. So that's our custom dialog. Now we haven't talked about putting stuff in our custom dialog. And if I click design, notice how on the left we have our components in their order. They are in hierarchical order, right? On the right we have information just like we did before. I just want to show you this again, where we have our content panel. Here's my dialog, and there's my initialize private function, or method, if you will, right? Okay, so I want to add something in when I, when I pull up this dialog, I want to control, as an example, this size. So let's open this up. If you notice, my background, my default is hide on close, right? Enable is equal to true. I can also disable it, right? I can change my default font. Right now it's Lucida or Lucida Grande 13, right? My foreground, I can change my foreground icon image. I can make it modal or non-modal. Modal means you have to do something with it or you can't continue. Remember I talked about modal or non-modal? Let's make it modal is true. So I'm going to click modal as true. So we're going to make it just like a regular dialog box, right? This is pretty big, but I'm changing everything here in my options as opposed to doing it in code, right? So let's see how much stuff I can do here and how it's going to affect the rest of my code here. So modal, it says no exclude. Modality is modeless. I can choose document modal, application modal, toolkit modal, right? So what kind of mode is it going to have? Let's leave it as modeless for now. Well, actually, it doesn't make sense. If I make it modal and I make it modeless, it kind of cancels each other out. Let's make it application modal. All right. My opacity is 1, means it's 100% opaque. If I want to make it so you can see through it, let's change my opacity, to 0.8, so we can see through it a little bit. My tab order, I don't have any tabs. I don't have a title. Let's add a title. So my title is going to be, my dialog. So my dialog, right? My type is normal, right? Look how it appeared. My dialog. That's not right. I want to. I don't want to have any quotation marks. So that's not right. My normal utility or a pop-up. Let's make it normal, right? I think that's enough changes. Let's see what happens when I go back to code view, right? So I'm gonna go back to code view, and now I see that there's a few more changes. In my dialog, I set my title, to my dialog. I set my opacity to 0.8. I set my modality type to application modal. I set modal to true, and then I hit initialize. Well, I don't want this to happen in my constructor. I want this to happen in my in here, right? So grab this, put it in here, right, as an example, and let's see if that does anything. Also, my bounds. When I set bounds, what other options do I have for set bounds? If I'm just going to do that again, if I say set bounds and I open it up, do I have some kind of other options? And I do. If you notice, set bounds X, Y, width, and height. And I also have my rectangle. That's one thing. What about if I want to make it so that my object, my window for my dialog is you can't do anything with it. You can't resize it. How do I do that? You'd have to look at the API documentation for that. Let's check this out. Let's run this thing. Whoa, oh wait, sorry. Okay, so we got a bit of an issue, right? It says a legal operation in main. It says the dialog is decorated, right? My set opacity is, and my initialize, and all this kind of stuff is happening. And I'm doing that before I do the other things, right? Let me show you why it's that, because that's what it would have done anyway, right? And that's why I put it like this, right? I set bounds, I get the content, I do all this kind of stuff. Well, I need to set all this up before I do set title and blah, 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 right? I can't do it before, right? I can't do set the title and set modal and modality and everything else. I need to do it after I instantiate my border layout, my flow layout, all this kind of stuff. I don't care about my buttons too much. Like this is all my buttons. I don't care about this piece. But after I got to do all this, chances are after everything else. Let me just cut this out and put it here and see if that makes any difference. I'm going to go back to here and press play. No. It could be my modality. It says dialog is decorated, right? If I click on this to see what it does for my thread, how do I find out what this this problem is? Right? Because there's a problem here that I've got, right? I got 19 warnings and I got some errors. Well, I don't have any errors anymore. I could debug. I could put in some stuff. I can actually add a breakpoint in and step through all that kind of stuff to see what happens. I could do that. From a time perspective, the easiest way to do that is start commenting, right? So I'm gonna seriously. So let's take out opacity. Seems to be one of the issues. So let's just take this out. Modality is the other issue. Let's take that out. And set modal to true is, let's take this out for a second. But let's leave the title as my dialog. So that's the first thing we've kind of changed. Let's try this out and then go back here and press play. So that works. We got my dialog, right? So the title is okay. Let's try adding the next one, which is a little faster than doing the debugging, right? So let's add the opacity piece. So see if my opacity crashes me, right? Because I'm making an opacity of 0.8, right? Run this thing, bam, I get the error. So that seems to crash my system, the opacity piece of 0.8f, right? There could be different reasons for that, because maybe I haven't set up a way of supporting that yet, right? Again, we're running blind on this one, right? Let's go to the next one. Let's go to modality. Let's see if modality and modal true is going to crash me, these two options, because they're kind of related, right? Oh, that's pretty good, right? So if I want to click away, I'm good. But I can't do anything with this. If this was running from another app, this would be modal. Okay, so that kind of works. The opacity piece doesn't work. So I'm going to kind of get rid of it. And there might be a reason for that, because the way we've done our dialog. Questions so far on this dialog, JDialog, which is kind of like and again, I can put in some custom icons by dragging. Let's go to design and see if I'm good with the design. I can still drag and drop some stuff in here, just like normal, just like a regular container, right, or regular window. And again, what I would do is, if I want to go to menu and I want to add in a menu bar, I can put in a menu bar. We're going to try that later on. I can definitely add in things like labels, in the middle. So if I go click on JLabel and I kind of hover in here, ooh, we got a problem. See how this is? It's kind of showing me where this is going, right? Remember, in order for me to drag and drop necessarily, I'm clicking here once and then clicking over here. But notice that there's no container for my dialog, right? I've got my button pane, which is down here. But up here I'm okay, right? But once I go up to the top, I can't do it that way, right? What about here in my content pane? Can I just drag it here? There's different options, right? I can drag it to my picture, or I can drag it to my hierarchy. So let's try dragging it to my content panel. So put it in there. And if you notice, here's my new label, which I can name and all that kind of stuff, and say something like, it's whatever message, error. That's my error. It's my custom error box, right? And I've added in a label that's anonymous. I can change the name of the label, right? And if you notice, it changed automatically to label error. It's taking the name, the string name, and I'm making it original. That's what it's trying to do, right? If you notice, the text is error. I can go in here and change the text. I can also add Tooltip Text, where if I hover over this error, it'll show me what it is. Let's try this out. So I'll say error, just to describe what Tooltip Text is, right? And then when I go back to source, you see that it's added a couple of additional things here. So here's in my initialize method, but down in here, inside my content pane now, notice how I'm adding in another JLabel, something new, which is called label error, and it's adding in the label in here, and it's assigning it because I don't have any kind of top, right, left, any kind of border or layout. It's just going to put it right in the middle. Let's see what happens when we launch this thing, if it causes an error now. So run this thing, and then when it launches, I get this error, and if I hover over it, I get this tooltip, right? When I hover over, that's built in. So I added tooltip text. All right, so slowly, we're getting there. Checking different options out, right? Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So we talked about the J option pane, and we kind of made our own J label, J dialog. And what I'm going to do now is, just because we've done a bunch of things, I'm going to update GitHub just so we can kind of be on the same page if you want to try some of those things out. And again, we're still exploring. We're in that stage. We're exploring the UI components, right? We haven't made anything useful yet, which we will have to do at some point. Can't just keep exploring, right? All right, so let's do this thing. So I'm going to right-click on my project. I'm going to go down to Team. I'm going to go to Commit. And of course, I've added a My Dialog option, which is this is the thing I've added in. And I've updated my program as a result. So I'm going to say added custom JDialog class, right? Called My Dialog. And I'll commit and push. And now you guys have that up online. If you want to follow along with what I've done, you can certainly do that by looking up on GitHub, right? And you can see some of this stuff here. Okay, just want to make sure I hit most of the PowerPoint today as much as I can. So again, this is these are the other Swing components we're going to be talking about. There's two different tool sets that we automatically get to use in Java the old way, right? One is Swing UI components, located in javax.swing, right? And the other one is the abstract window toolkit, and these are low-level tools we can use for UI components, right? Which is part of the AWT package, right? Those are the two components. So here's some of the ones we've seen so far: JLabel, a JText field, a JButton, a JCheckbox, a JCombo box, a JList, and a JPanel. And if you notice, a JPanel is what we use to put in some content. That's what that holds our content right now. And it says an area which components can be placed and organized in a JPanel. So we have a JFrame, right? Well, we have a JPanel where everything sits inside. The JFrame is actually the screen. Here's the hierarchy of how it looks, right? So we say we have an object, we have a component, because remember, everything comes from the component or object superclass. So our object superclass, the component is the subclass. Subclass of that is the container, and a subclass of container is the J component, whatever the J component is, whether it's a JFrame or a JPanel or whatever. It's another component. So two things to note for the exam when I ask you these questions. So it says most Swing components are not tied to actual UI components of the underlying platform. These things are known as lightweight components. So Swing components, lightweight. If I use AWT components, right, the abstract Windows kind of components or whatever, those are locally called, or averagely, they're called heavyweight components because they're actually accessing the windowing system. While on the Mac, it's accessing the operating system Windows system, right? That's what it's doing. And there are some Swing components that also act as heavyweight components. So again, lightweight or heavyweight. Actually, the way you should think about it is low level, high level, which is kind of an easier way to say it. They just call it heavyweight and lightweight. So class component is the superclass of all the UI components in Swing. Okay, so again, So again, class JComponent is the subclass of container, and JComponent itself is the superclass of all the lightweight swing components, and they're also called containers, right? All container type classes. All right, so common lightweight component features, right? Supported by JComponent. So a pluggable look and feel. They all look very similar. There's some shortcut keys for each of the components, which is cool, right? Common event handling capabilities, tooltips, which we just already saw. Support for accessibility, right? For those people with accessibility issues. And also localization. What's localization? You guys actually have it on the Microsoft side too, right? Language, but also locale, like actually culture is what it's called in Microsoft. So what happens is, let's say for example you're in Russia, right? And you have you're using a Russian application that's built in Java, right? Well, let me take that back. You have an application that's been built, but you're in Russia. The application should be smart enough to change up all the labels for the buttons as well as the label components, right? And everywhere else, all the text on the file, so that it's using Russian, right? With the same functionality. Same functionality, different language. That's localization, right? So you're going to change the way, the look and feel of the application according to the culture or the language that you're sitting inside. So it makes it more, it can kind of pass on. We're passing the application from, from one machine to the next, and it's not localized just to English, as an example. Okay, here's something we already know, which we've already seen, right? Most windows that can contain swing they're all instances of something called the J-frame, which is an indirect class of, there you go, this heavyweight component called window, right? So the heavyweight component, right, and it says indirect class. What's an indirect class again? Remember, we talked about direct classes and indirect classes. What's the direct class of J-frame, do you think? Probably component, J-component, my guess, right? So if J-component is the direct class, the indirect component would be the windowing class that you're going to get through the AWT, which is the system that's low level. That's the low level or heavyweight system that we're getting, right? So two things it provides: title bar, buttons to minimize, maximize, and close, which we've already seen, right? On the Mac, it's on the left side. On the Windows, it's on the right side. Those kind of things. And again, most of our examples here, we're going to use a J-frame, and they're going to have these concepts. So labels, as an example, are another UI component. It's also part of the J-component subclass, right? But it's definitely a place where you can have text that spits out, which we've seen before. So labels and buttons. Those are the main things we use everywhere in components. Let's give an example of that in code without using a drag and droppable interface like we've done already. Take a look at what we've got here. In the book, they show you that we have a heavyweight component called flow layout, which specifies, like it says, how components are arranged in our flow layout. We haven't talked about layouts yet. We have a J-frame, which is our basic window, a label, some swing constants, which we got to figure out what those are, right? An icon, hey, there's that swing icon, we were looking for it, right? And some kind of image icon, right? And these are all things that we're importing. We have them as a label frame. Here's a label frame, which extends a J-frame. So basically, this is our custom window that we've created. Excuse me. In our constructor, in the constructor of this object, right, we're actually sending through into the superclass of the constructor. We're sending through testing JLabel. And why? Because we can send in the value of our title bar right into the constructor, right, of the superclass. And we're going to set the layout as a new flow layout, all right? That's what it's going to do. A flow layout is a different kind of layout that we've been using. We're using a border layout so far, right? Now again, this is happening programmatically. There's no drag and drop here, right? So a different kind of J-frame than we've seen so far. Now we're creating a new label. Again, there's 3 labels we've defined, right? The first label, we're assigning a label, and we're saying label with text. And we're also setting the tooltip text, which you've already seen, just to support that. And we're using the add method to add the label to the J-frame. Think about our J-frame as our main component, right? and we're adding this label directly to the component inside of flow layout. So far, there isn't a J panel. It's just directly adding it into the frame. Okay? This is a different effect than what we've done so far. Let's finish off this little thing. So here's an icon. They've defined an icon by using the get resource method, right, to get an icon that's inside of their assets, right? They're using the get resource method to do that, and they're defining it as a new anonymous image icon, right? What they're doing. This is like, I mean, again, I would probably not do it this way myself, but it's the book, and what they're doing with the book is they're trying to condense the amount of code that's in here. This is a very common way of doing it, by the way. So we're getting an icon. We're assigning it as bug. It's type of icon, right? And that's why in the top here we're seeing that the swing is importing the icon class, right? So we can do that. Icon, they call it bug. Bug is the object, right? And we're using this image icon get class.get resource method to access the asset, which is bug1.ping, the PNG file that should exist somewhere inside of our assets. Our second label is another J label that not only puts the text in there, but actually uses the bug image that we're going to get, plus we use swing constants to move it to the left. This is a line left is what this does, right? And then of course we assign the tooltip, and then we add it to the JFrame with the add function, right? Now label 3, again, is a new J label. We add some other stuff. We set the icon to a bug. That's another way to do it. Instead of doing it this way, right, where we say J label and then bug as an icon, we can do it separately. That's what they're showing you here. So set text, instead of doing it this way, and instead of sending it into the constructor, we have some built-in getters and setters that we can use in our label object, right? So we can set text, we can set icon, we can set horizontal text position, we can set vertical text position, we can set tooltip text, and then we can add that in to our JFrame. Okay, let's check this out really quickly. We already have an example of this. If we go back to Eclipse, I'm going to close off my dialog.java and go back into my example frame, which is what we're using right now. And if you notice, we almost have everything in there that we've done, but in this particular case, what we're doing is we're using it as let's convert it. We're going to convert this one to the same kind without using a J panel, right? So right now our example frame uses a J panel as a content panel, right? We're going to get rid of it, right? So let's try this out. Boop. And we're not going to use a border layout or an empty border. We're definitely going to, kind of describe a J label, which we've already kind of got in there, our first name label. We get rid of these two things, right? Now when we do that, there's some errors, right? Because there is none of this, so we're going to get rid of those, right? In our initialize function. And this set default close operation we're going to keep. Set bounds we're going to keep. This is for the frame itself. And content panel and all this kind of stuff, and set content pane, if you notice, all that has to go because we don't need any of that stuff. This frame name, first name label we're going to keep. And where it says this.content panel add, we're just going to say this.add because we're going to add it directly to the frame. And we don't have a border layout of north. We don't have that, right? Because we don't have a border layout right now in our updated class. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. If you notice, what we do here from a setup perspective is we set the layout to new flow layout, right? And we also send in in the super class, we assign the title bar text right here. So let's do that. So here's my example frame. I'm going to call the super, and I'm going to set in there, my example frame. So example frame as my title bar text. And if you notice, then we're going to initialize, right? Now, I didn't have to do it there, but usually the super class, remember, by convention, by requirement, you cannot do anything before you do the super class call, right? Now, the reason why I didn't have to call super is because if I have an empty constructor, right, there's different constructors for the superclass. The superclass can take nothing, right? It doesn't have to take, there is an empty constructor for the superclass JFrame. You don't have to send anything in there, right? You can set them later, set title bar text and all that kind of stuff, right? So the same thing goes with this. So this is the first thing. Now we have to set our layout. So in our layout, I want to do that here, right? When we set our bounds, I want to set my layout. So let's just do that here. So I'm going to say set layout, and then if I press Control Space, right, I can choose the layout manager type. So I'm going to kind of it's expecting a layout manager, which is going to be a new flow layout. Let's say new flow, and if I press Control Space, flow layout is what it's going to ask me to put in. It's an anonymous layout manager that we're using. So now we've taken care of our layout, right? Before we were using a border layout. We didn't use the set layout method. By the way, because these are sets, set bounds, set layout, you could always use this, right? Because the this keyword for this class, because this class is a JFrame, you could certainly use the this keyword because these set default, close operations, set bounds, and set layout are the default methods that come with the JFrame class, right? So that all we're doing is we're utilizing these classes, and so therefore you can use this keyword, which makes sense. I like it. You know, I like using the this. It's very explicit. We know what it means, right? It's part of our class. But these are public methods that come with our superclass, or protected methods, actually. Okay, so that's one thing. The next one is, so we've taken care of these requirements, right? We've taken care of our label. We've added it to the, in here. Now I want to set the position of my label because that's important, right? I don't want to set my image yet, but I want to definitely set my position. So if you notice here, it says that I can, when I define my label, I define it as swing constants left. I can do that, right? So when I say a new J label, I have some options for how I create that thing. Let's look at the options for my J label. By the way, here's something interesting. I can make my own custom label by extending the J label class, right? Where it would take additional information, not just my J label. It can ask for other things like position, like absolute positioning. I can ask for whatever. I can make my own classes. I can extend the UI components that are built in here to make my own components, right? But let's keep the components the way they are for now. So JLabel, let's go back to Eclipse, and notice that I've added in a JLabel, but there's other options. Let's just, instead of JLabel first name, I can kind of put Control Space, and then I notice that there's some other options, some other constructors for JLabel. I can ask for an icon, a string, an icon image, and some horizontal alignment, a string, the text, and horizontal alignment, which I like. I like these two things. String text, icon, and then horizontal alignment. Just an icon image and some other stuff. So I like this horizontal alignment idea, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to say my string text, which is first name. That's what I want to put in there. And my alignment type. Now, remember how I did it before. It's, if you want to look in the default, which is swing constants dot and something, right? So I'm going to start typing swing, Control Space. Control Space gives me my code hinting, swing constants, right? Dot, and then where do I want to put it? Bottom, left, horizontal, leading, left, north, where do I want it, right? Let's make it left, right? And let's see what it does now. Right, so it shouldn't do much of anything different than we see before. I've added this thing in here, and I don't need my border layout because that makes no sense. I don't have a border layout. I just want to add my first name label, right? So I get rid of that. Okay, cool. So I've got a very simplified version. Hey, here's a question now. We did this one by hand, and we killed my JPanel. Do I still have access to the design view? Remember, I killed a bunch of stuff. Let's click my design view and say if I've got it. And yes, we do, right? And this is a preview of what it's going to look like. So this first name, but hey, wait a minute. I said left. How come it's here? Well, what does this mean anyway, left? Well, my horizontal alignment is left, but my horizontal alignment where? Well, within my label. Take a look. I can resize my label by pulling it around, right? Watch. So watch if I do one of these. If I kind of start resizing it, can I resize my label? Like actually resize it? Well, no, right? So what horizontal alignment do they speak of anyway, Right? That's the first thing to understand, right? My foreground, and what about if I change my horizontal alignment to right? Doesn't do anything, right? Why? Because I don't have any kind of layout whatsoever right now, right? How about other options? My horizontal alignment is okay. I can certainly specify that. Let's keep it to the left. I can specify an icon, but if I click here, it's going to say, hey, well, there's a default image. My class resource, don't forget to refresh my project before, absolute path to the file system. I don't want that for quick testing. Never use in real applications, or no image, right? So I can definitely choose an image, a default image, or some kind of class path. And look at what I've got here. I've got my resources.jar, right? And right now, I don't have anything in here that allows me to click an image, to add it in. I don't have something like that. There's nothing that shows my default package in here, even this one, right? So we're going to look at that later on. But I could add an icon in here, right, as an example if I wanted to. Okay, here's my vertical alignment. My vertical alignment is center. My horizontal alignment is left. Maybe what I really meant is this is center, and my vertical alignment is top, center. What about bottom? What does that do? Well, that doesn't kind of do anything. Let's leave it as center as well for now. So center, center doesn't mean anything. And now that I've saved this thing, go back to source. I made some changes. Where does it make those changes? It makes them in here, right? Swing constant center, right? If you notice that added that in instead of left, changed it here in the code. So we can still work with the code and the design view as long as, and here's where my proviso comes into play, as long as you've kicked off this JFrame from the drag and droppable tools, the window builder, right? It has to be inside of a class, right? If you just make it so it's not a part of a class, it'll fail. And if there's any error in here, it won't allow you to design. Okay? Just letting you know. My border layout looks like it's useless. And here's something. I can always go right-click, right? And if I want to refactor, I want to kind of remove. What if I want to remove or clean up my, my stuff, right? Like for example, is it refactor or my imports? I want to kind of clean up my imports. How do I do that? So if I go clean up, and here's one thing I can do, right? I'm going to press finish to see what it does. And what it does when I do clean up is it removes any unused imports from my file. Because sometimes I just add all these other imports in here. I don't need to, and it makes the application a little heavier when I leave the imports on. Okay, now you wouldn't notice because the application is so stupidly small right now, so it doesn't matter, right? But in real life, you want to kind of remove any imports you don't need. Okay, so that's kind of cool what we've done there. Let's move to one more example, and then we'll stop. Actually, you know what? It's kind of more than halfway. Let's take a short break, 10 minutes, get some water into us, go to a washroom break and come back for the rest.